Well, thanks for listening wherever you happen to be today. You are listening to Unstoppable Mindset. I am your host, Michael Hingson, and today we get to chat with Kathy Harmon-Luber, who is a Reiki Master, a healer, and she comes by it very honestly. Why do I say that? Because for many years, like others I've had the opportunity to chat with on the podcast, she actually went through some very serious, debilitating, and um, unhealthy issues. But also, like a number of people, as you will see, Kathy is very unstoppable. She went through it, and it has kind of helped shape what she does today and where she is in her life. And I'm going to leave it at that because I think it'll be a whole lot more fun if you get to hear from her. So, Kathy, welcome to Unstoppable Mindset.
Hi, Michael. I'm so happy to be here with you today.
And the other thing about Kathy is we don't live all that far apart from each other because I live in a town called Victorville and she lives in Idlewild. And so we're, as I said, she's below us, although a little ways away, but I could probably, if I had a really good strong arm and a well-built paper airplane, I could throw a plane that would go into her window and land on her desk. But I think that's going to be a little tough to do under normal conditions, but you never know what'll happen. But I'm really glad that you're here with us. Why don't we start, if we could, by you telling us a little bit about kind of the early Kathy growing up and so on. That's always a fun
Oh,
place to start.
yeah, always a good place to start. Thanks. Michael, I grew up in Pennsylvania, even though we live in California now. I grew up in Pennsylvania, Western Pennsylvania, in a lovely small town. Our home was on a property that my dad planted quite a lot of trees. He was a forestry major, so he planted lots of trees. We had this beautiful wooded yard, and I spent a lot of time outdoors and with our dog, our collie Taffy, and exploring the woods and nature. And so nature has always been such a big part of my life as a result of that early upbringing. But I was also very, very creative back then and now. I played piano. I got started really young when I was 3 years old. My mom started giving me piano lessons because I had just sat down beside her one day and started to play and wanted to play. Then I moved on to flute. So I've my dad played a lot of classical music, and so I was always very inspired with that. And I also did a lot of art. And so young Kathy was very creative, and I've carried that through my life. It's been something that's given me a lot of strength through adversity. And as I like to say, we all need to find our medicine to get us through life and the challenges that we face. And creativity is my medicine, along with nature is my medicine as well. So yeah, it's a little bit about my early days.
So you went to school and all those usual things that us kids did back in the day, as it were.
I
You,
did.
you went to college?
I did. I went to college.
Where did you go
Um,
and what did you do?
okay, well, interesting. We moved when I was 14 from this idyllic life in Pennsylvania to North Carolina. My dad got a great job offer in Charlotte, and he moved our family
Hmm.
there. So I went to high school there for a couple of years, and then I went to college. He wanted me to stay in state, and so I went to University of North Carolina at Wilmington on the coast. I majored in marine biology. My dad did not want me to major in the creative arts. He was adamant about it. He wanted me to be a business major. And, I subsequently have had a lot of experience in business, but I also just had this love for nature that was kindled in my childhood. We also took trips to the beach once we moved to North Carolina. And so I decided to be a marine biology major. I was very inspired by Rachel Carson and her books and other writings. And so that is what I majored in and loved it. I used to, snorkel and scuba dive and all of that, and just found the ocean to be another home. Yeah.
Cool. So you went and got a degree in marine biology, but what did you then do with it?
Yeah, isn't that interesting?
Yeah,
So, so,
I know the feeling well.
so I moved with my soon to be now ex-husband to Washington D.C. after college, and I just had the fire in the belly to work with advocacy organizations that make the world a better place, and that's been my entire career uh, prior to career change into sound healing and the other healing arts and Reiki and all of that, which we'll talk about. But yeah, I was very inspired by my grandfather, who, he was one of those people who was always volunteering, always making a difference in the world, believed that we could make a difference no matter what was going on in the world, and in the power of every person to make that difference. And so I was really inspired by that. And so I went to work in nonprofit organizations, and I worked in environmental organizations. I worked with a couple of organizations that worked at the grassroots level to empower environmental organizations to fight a lot of the big battles with corporate polluters and Superfund sites and things of that nature. I went on to work with a lot of different, varied nonprofit organizations over the years, including when I was in DC, the Smithsonian, Norman Lear's People for the American Way, a constitutional rights organization. So I've had a lot of varied experience in the nonprofit world, but it was working, in environmental causes that really lit me up. And later, moving to California as a consultant, I also worked for environmental organizations. So it's been a passion of mine. Yeah.
So it sounds though like marine biology, in a sense, had a little bit of an influence. Did you find that there were ways and places where you were able to use some of that knowledge or some of the experience you gained along the way with marine biology?
Yeah, for sure. Within the environmental work that I did, I did fundraising and grant writing, and certainly the marine biology. I took ecology classes and animal physiology classes and all kinds of things that weren't specifically marine biology related, but biology and nature related. So that well-rounded education has served me very, very well over the years. And I might also say that at the time that we moved to DC and I went to work in these environmental nonprofits, I really wanted to get an advanced degree in marine biology. There were hiring freezes in the government. They were doing a lot of the hiring of young marine biology majors. And so I kind of hit a roadblock there, which required me to pivot a little bit. And that's kind of been the story of my career as I've gone through many different kinds of nonprofits, as opportunities opened that seemed interesting to me and worthwhile causes. I have had these pivots into slightly, different fields and away from the marine biology, but it to this day, I've still done like a lot of snorkeling and put that information to use as well. So it's been both professionally as well as in my personal life. Yeah.
Well, so you were in DC for how long?
12 years.
Wow. And then what did you do?
Then I had a great opportunity. I worked, the last job I had in DC was working with the Democratic National Campaign Committee to raise what was then like a record-breaking amount of money. And I was offered a job doing some consulting in LA. And I really love DC. I have so many great memories and lots of friends still to this day. But I had the opportunity in working in DC to travel to California a lot. And I loved it here. And so when that job opportunity came, I decided to move to California. I've worked with a lot of different varied. I got out of politics at that point and into other kinds of nonprofits that make the world a better place. And that includes, the arts, health and human services, helping traumatized children, mental health issues. So quite a lot of organizations that help people. Yeah, I love
So
that.
what did your father think about you going into all this nonprofit work, even though he wanted you to get and you got your degree in marine biology, or did he approve?
He wasn't crazy about it, I have to say, because he didn't feel that nonprofits are business, because people think if you work for a nonprofit, there's no money, there's no profit. And in the strict sense of the word, nonprofits cannot make profit that is then shared with board members and stakeholders and all of that. But, many nonprofit organizations raise millions upon millions of dollars to put into their work. It's just that they have a mandate from the government to spend it on the programs, on the programmatic work. So he wasn't crazy about that. But by that point, he realized his daughter was going to do what she wanted to do in life. And I've never looked back. It has been deeply fulfilling. And I do feel like a lot of nonprofit organizations are real change makers in the world, right? And
Yeah.
so it's been deeply fulfilling to me at that level. And the fundraising part I kind of fell into when I was in DC. People took me under their wings and taught me how to fundraise, and I became development director and VP of development and advancement and all those things. And that's what powers the nonprofit work. So I always felt really good about that. Yeah.
Well, the reality is, of course, that people who really are committed to their nonprofit work and to whatever nonprofit organization they are a part of will tell you that it's all about trying to make a difference in the world. It's all about trying to improve the world, whether they specifically are the ones to make a difference. They want to be part of the process that will make the world a better place. And they do recognize there is money, but they also recognize that the more important thing are maybe the tangibles and possibly the intangibles that go along with making a real difference.
Right, exactly. And it's such a wonderful opportunity to, in the fundraising part, money comes from individuals, it comes from private foundations, and it also comes from corporate philanthropy. So it was an opportunity to work in partnership with corporations to also make good things happen. Yeah.
Did all of your work, both in marine biology and just the things that your dad wanted you to do in terms of business and so on, did all of that experience and the terminology that you got to learn, did all that help you?
Yes, absolutely. It's been fascinating to me, Michael, how at every step along my career path, how I've been able to take what I've learned in marine biology, in and just nature studies in general as part of that, getting that degree, not strictly marine environment, but the natural environment in general, and everything I've learned in working in nonprofits and in fundraising, and all of my varied interests. Like even in the arts, I've worked as a development consultant with lots of arts organizations. So I've been able to sort of marry all of these what seem like disparate skills and bring them into almost every job not almost every job I've ever had. So that part has been fascinating to see how interconnected all of those things have been in making it a rich experience and making it a career. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, along the way, your life changed because of some physical things that happened to you. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that? Because I know that leads to a lot of the choices that you've made since and a lot of the things that you've learned.
Absolutely. I think it's like so many of us in life, disruptions can happen in our lives that set us on a different course. Or maybe just we course correct a little bit, or maybe it's dramatic. And in my life, it's been just a little bit of both. When I was in my 20s, I was diagnosed with autoimmune diseases and severe hereditary spinal diseases. I was always really interested in pursuing complementary medicine right along with Western medicine. Both have helped me enormously. And I was doing just great. I had doctors when I was in my 20s tell me I had the spine of an 80-year-old at that point, and that I also would probably end up in a wheelchair by my mid 30s. And I'm thrilled to say that I am not currently, and I'm many decades older.
I was going to say you're a
And
lot older than in your 30s.
yes, I am. And so I've been able to really find a healing path that has helped me to really thrive physically. So that was one part of it. But then I was doing just great. I had some minor setbacks over the years, especially with my spine, disc ruptures and things of that nature that would take 2 or 3 months of being down for the count, and then I'm back, strong and right back at my very, very active life. I've always been, you know, uh, when I was younger, I was a runner. I've always been a hiker. I love to swim like an hour at a time at the pool. Not just playful swimming, but serious swimming. And I played a lot of high impact sports and things. From basketball when I was young to tennis and volleyball and all the things. So super active life. And I managed until 2016 when I had gone to visit a client. It was an overnight trip and it involved several hours in a car each way. And all year long in 2016, it was a very, very big year. I had traveled internationally. My husband and I did a drive all the way up the coast from Southern California to Oregon. I was serving on 3 boards of directors. Yes, I was still working more than full time. I had quite a lot going on in my life. And I was getting these subtle intuitive hits that I really needed to rest my back more. It was very, very painful. And I practiced good self-care. I'd rest for a while and then I'd be right back to my really busy life, right? So the day after this trip to the client, I was very excited. I'm standing in the kitchen telling my husband as the coffee is brewing all about the trip. And I get this extraordinarily severe, like I've had never had before in my back, to the point that I barely made it to the bedroom without falling. He had to help me. And I'd had ruptured discs before. This was really different in terms of the intensity of the pain. If the others were a 10, this was like a 20. And I could not move. Once I got laying down flat on my back in bed, I could not move at all, like without just incredible searing pain. And I thought, well, here we are. It's going to take another couple months, maybe 3, for this to, resolve. I know I have to really be down for the count now and really rest. And, so I started just making changes. I knew I had to resign some boards temporarily, I thought. And I talked with doctors and all of that. And come to, fast forward, I was bedridden like that for 5 years. 5 years. I wasn't prepared for that. I really thought it was going to be a more or less speedy recovery. And it wasn't like other recoveries where I could even prop myself up in bed and work from my laptop. I was completely down for the count. It was inoperable. Doctors said it could take anywhere from 6 months to 3 years to heal. Maybe you'll be better and maybe you won't. So I went through those moments of, it may be always like this. It may not get better. I mean, one neurosurgeon said, you may not be able to ever really walk much again. And in the early years of that, I couldn't walk to the bedroom door. So, that was depressing. It was, you go down the downward spiral of feelings, like, and asking all the wrong questions. I was in that place of asking, why me? Why did this happen to me? What will it always be this way? What if it's never better? What if I am completely reliant on my husband and friends for the rest of my life? You go to that place. It's human nature, and we can't beat ourselves up when these kinds of things happen, and we tend to, either blame ourselves or go down the dark rabbit hole. But the important thing, as you have talked about so much, and that you and I both know, is that when great challenges happen in our lives, just like when they don't, but magnified when they do, every moment is a choice. And I realized one day that, I could prop my laptop on my stomach and look for inspiring quotes. And one day I woke up and I thought, that's what I'm going to do this morning. I'm in a bad place. I started looking for inspiring quotes of people who went through bad stuff, who got through it. And I realized in that moment, it was like a lightning bolt. Every moment I have a choice. I could go and just forever live in that dark place, or I can try to find hope and a new purpose in my life. I could choose to be a bitter, old, unhappy woman one day, or I could take a different path. And I started thinking, well, how would I take that different path? Here I am lying in bed. I can't do anything for myself. What can I do? I began looking at it from the standpoint of not disability, but ability. What is my ability? What can I do? And I actually, with my computer, made a list of everything I couldn't do, right? I couldn't go for walks. I couldn't swim. I couldn't walk to the kitchen at that point. Like I said, I couldn't even get to the bedroom door. I could no longer ride horses, which was something I loved to do. I, up until that point, had been playing classical flute in our town at least once or twice a weekend professionally. I could not even lift up my flute because it twisted my back in a way that was just completely unbearable. So in one column, I made that list of everything. And I said, I can't be on boards of directors anymore, because at that point, that was 2016, 2017. We weren't using Zoom and other platforms to connect virtually as we began to do during the pandemic. And so I made a list of the things that had to go. What did I have to completely get rid of? I resigned boards. I cut back on client writing work. And then I looked at all the things that I love to do, my flute playing, my art, my photography. And I said, all right, what is a workaround here? I can't ride horses. I can sketch horses. I love to sketch. So maybe I'll just lean into that. That was something I never did before then. I wasn't sketching or painting horses. I couldn't stand at my easel, but I could sketch. I couldn't play my classical flute. I could play my Native American flute because it didn't twist my spine. I had, Tibetan and crystal singing bowls, which I loved. I'd gotten into sound healing a couple of decades ago now, for anxiety and relaxation from stress, right? And I thought, well, there's something I can do. I'll have my husband bring those things to me, and I'll do those things. And what I'm saying is, I found new and different things that lit me up, that gave me joy. And there's a very good reason for doing this. First, what got me to that point, unbeknownst to the reason why it's important, which I'll get to in a second, but what got me to that point is asking the right questions instead of, poor me, why did this happen to me? It was, what if this is an opportunity for me to to turn inward more. I've always been a very spiritual person, uh, not necessarily in a religious way, but spiritual. What if this is an opportunity for me to really lean into that? What if it's an opportunity for me to learn new things and get certified in sound healing and become a Reiki master? What if it's an opportunity for me to find a new path in life? What if this is a portal to something new and different, a new and different life purpose? And when I was telling you about all the nonprofit work I did and still do, that I thought that was my ultimate life purpose. And because of this massive health challenge on this healing journey, I've discovered there's more to it than that. Sound healing, energy healing, all of that is part of my new expanded life purpose and the gifts that I bring to the world. So what I'm saying is, when we look at it as our healing journey, as embedded in our life's journey, of course, if we live long enough, we're all going to face health challenges, be they physical, mental, emotional, even spiritual, right? So our healing journey embedded in our life's journey, embedded in our soul's journey, or what we came here to do in the world. And so healing journey becomes a portal. The reason why this is so important, I just finished, Michael, reading a really fabulous book by a doctor, Dr. Jeffrey Rediger, I believe his name is. It's called Cured. And it is about the medical science behind people who have really rather miraculous healings. They don't just, their cancers don't go into remission only. They are cured of cancer. He's been following some of these people for decades, and he decided from the medical perspective, why do some people have amazing healings and others don't? And many of these people were given 2 months to live from their particular cancer or other diseases. And decades later, they're still alive and they're thriving. Why is that? And it seems the common denominator throughout his book is not owning the label of your disease as the be all and end all. In other words, I am not my spinal diseases. I am not my autoimmune diseases. I have a purpose in life. And then finding that purpose, living an intentional life that brings you great joy. He told the story of a woman who had 2 months to live from an extremely aggressive pancreatic cancer, one of the worst cancers. And she spent the weekend with her girlfriends. They went to the beach. They all, gave her lots of love and encouragement for what she thought was the final couple of months of her life. Then she decided, I am not my cancer, and I am going to just live every day of my life, however short it remains. I'm going to live it full of joy, full of passion, and full of love. And that's what she did. Fast forward over a decade, like close to 15 years later, she ends up in the hospital, same hospital that did all the testing for the pancreatic cancer. And she had appendicitis. She saw the doctors and they looked at her chart and said, we didn't think you were alive, right? She only had 2 months to live. Here she is, nearly 15 years later, alive. And then she began working with the doctor who wrote this book to even explore further why she's still alive. Turns out living a life of purpose and full of love and support, following your passions is for many people what helps them to transcend and have these rather amazing healings. Mm-hmm. And so I have been, I was doing that then without knowing that. I only read the book a couple months ago. So it's a relatively new book out. I I began just sort of following that, and now I'm leaning into it even more, as you can imagine, knowing that's kind of a recipe for thriving, right?
Right. And well, and I think it's been known in some quarters for quite a while
Yeah,
that your mental attitude and your perceptions can dramatically and can totally, I think, actually control how you are, how healthy you are, and so on. Disease is really dis-ease, but
yes,
it is as much, if not more, in most cases, mental than anything else. That doesn't mean that some people aren't going to get a broken arm or something like that, or in your case, you had some very bad back problems. But it also doesn't mean that your mind doesn't have the ability to help you move beyond that, which is what you did.
exactly. And you know, in my book, I dedicate a lot of my book, Suffering to Thriving, to this concept of suffering is a choice, unnecessary suffering. Okay, I want to say right up front, I'm not talking about people who are in war-torn countries or in countries where there are terrible, injustices to people. That's a different kind of suffering. I'm talking about the kind of suffering that is in our mind, that we perpetuate with our minds. Suffering is a choice. Unnecessary suffering is a choice. Thriving is a choice. And I write a lot about this in my book, about how we need to make our mind our medicine. And that's not false positivity. It's about training your mind not to go down the negative rabbit hole of the terrible questions, of perseverating about all the bad things that can happen. Because look, life is complicated in our world. Bad things happen every day. It's important to find a place within us, that place of stillness where we can live in the moment. And when we sit here, like I'm sitting here right now with you, this is a beautiful moment. There are lots of terrible things going on in the world. There are lots of terrible things happening to our planet environmentally. And we can choose to find moments of peace in our lives. That peace, that stillness within, that is healing. And so harnessing the power of that in our lives every day, every moment is a choice. We can do something healing or not. And you and I have talked about this before, the Buddhist nun, Pema Chodron, who I'm a big fan of because she is just so plain speaking about the challenges of daily life. And, how do we thrive through what's going on in our world even. She talks about every moment is a choice between fear versus love. What would fear decide? Fear goes down that rabbit hole and doesn't come out, and just lives in that dark place, and we feel sorry for ourselves. It's human to do that. It's human nature to do that to some degree. But what would love do if we're being loving towards ourselves and the people we're in community with, right? People in our lives who we love. How would love decide?
Right. I would submit that fear isn't necessarily a rabbit hole that we have to go down. That is to say, fear is in part physiological and in part mental.
That's right.
But fear is also something where, again, like with most things, we have the choice of how to deal with it. And,
Yes.
We've talked about my new book, and I've talked about it here on the podcast,
Yes.
Live Like a Guide Dog, which is all about discussing the idea of learning to control fear. Fear can be a very powerful tool in our arsenals. It doesn't necessarily need to be something that overwhelms us, or, as I put it, blinds us. The reality is that fear is something that, if we learn to use it properly, can make us more aware, more perceptive. It can help our visualizations. And that's what we need to deal with. You said it in a very interesting way a few moments ago when you talked about living in the moment. The problem with fear is that what we usually learn on this earth, many of us anyway, is that we have to, what if everything? What if this happens? Oh my God, that's horrible. What if that happens? And as several people have written over the years, the problem with most all of our fears is they never come to pass. Yes. But we spend so much time dwelling on them that we don't look at what caused them, where they come from, and what good is it going to do for us to continue to dwell on things when all we're doing is making stuff up as we go, but rather to say, okay, I'm aware of this. And when you go back and study it, that's what caused me to think that way. Okay, I understand that now, and I'm aware of that, and I don't need to worry about that because I recognize that's just a myth that I'm trying to create when I don't need to do it.
Oh, I love that so much, Michael. That's exactly it. Exactly it. You know, fear, like you said, is an important feeling because as human beings, you know, think of our long ago ancestors and saber-toothed tigers. Like, you couldn't be curious about that big cat. You had to be fearful of it or you could lose your life, right? The problem is today we're not being chased by crazy wild animals, most of us. And we're fearful of things that happen in everyday life to the point that a lot of people just have this running emotion of fear all the time. What I have found, and I've read a lot about this, and I'm very excited to read your book and learn even more about it from you. I think it's really important to face our fears and to be curious about them. For example, you know, I would be very, very fearful about certain things. And when I really sat down and faced them and said, what is behind this fear? And then what's behind that?
Well, let's go back to the saber-tooth. Let's go back to the saber-tooth tiger a minute. Were we just afraid of the cat, or did we observe and learn and become respectful of it and gave it its space while it may not have cared about our space so much, but we learned to recognize it and to respect it more than to fear it? Because the problem with fear as such, when we let it run rampant, is that we lose our ability to put things in perspective. And I expect that those cave people realized, I don't want to tangle with this cat because. Now, that doesn't mean that there wasn't a level of fear, but again, fear used in the right way leads to better awareness, better observation, being aware of when that cat's around, looking for it, learning more about how to recognize when the cat's there so that you can avoid it, which doesn't mean that you're not afraid of it in a sense, but more you're aware of it and you learn to respect and deal with it. Yeah, on the other hand, I wonder if there are any cave people that ever got to make friends with a saber-toothed tiger. You never know.
We never know. Yeah, it could well be. But in regular, you know, everyday life now, like often we'll be afraid. And I can remember this very well. In the first couple of years of being bedridden, I was afraid of my spine. I was afraid my spine was going to get worse. I was afraid that if I started walking, I might make it worse. And then I sat down one day and I thought, I can't live in fear of my own body. You know, our bodies are so wise. Everything, pain, allergies, hives, anxiety, it all tells us something. It's a teacher. And so is fear, like in the case of the saber-toothed tiger.
Right.
You know, it teaches us something. So if we can approach fear from the perspective of, okay, why am I afraid of, again, years ago, walking for fear that my spine would collapse further? Why am I turning this into a fear of my own body? And then I would be, okay, well, if it happens again, I'm afraid that I'm really going to be a burden on my family. And you go down, you know, that line of inquiry. Okay, well, what's behind that? And what's behind that and that? And is that a worthwhile fear to live your life
There
by?
you go.
And I came to the point where it's like, no, I have to take calculated risks. I'm not going to do anything crazy, but let's set small goals for myself. And sure enough, now I'm walking. I'm able to walk. I'm able to walk a couple of miles, but it began with those baby steps that were full of fear. We have to face that and dig underneath it. And I, like anything, when you confront it, it takes a lot of the scariness out of it, actually.
Mm-hmm.
Can just face the fear, right?
Absolutely. What is it that eventually happened to you or because of you that healed essentially as much as possible your spine so that you are able to walk and so on now?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would love to say it was one thing, but like most things in life, it wasn't. I was doing quite a lot of things. I was doing a lot of visualization of walking. I was doing a lot of visualization of going about my regular life. There was a time I couldn't stand in the kitchen and make dinner. I visualized standing in the kitchen and making a cup of coffee, a cup of tea, a dinner. And so I did a lot of work in my mind and this comes from athletes, elite athletes
Mm-hmm.
use visualization to win their games or to win their gold medal, right? So I learned a lot from that, right? Visualization really helped. I really did a deep dive of research into supplements that help the body to fight inflammation. I was, my whole life I have been either vegetarian or pescatarian, eating fish and shellfish. Um, I I began to introduce things like chicken into my diet at one point when I recognized the need for more protein. But it's about listening to your body and what it needs in
Mm-hmm.
order to heal. Supplementation, Ayurvedic medicine. I saw a naturopath. I just began to explore every single thing. Then, after about 3 years, I was cleared to go to physical therapy. Physical therapy has saved me so many times, from sports injuries. I've had torn menisci in my knees, and, doctors would say, I think you're going to need surgery. And physical therapy helped so much that I've avoided that surgery my entire life. So when the doctor said it was inoperable because of the way the disc ruptured and glommed onto the sciatic nerve and other spinal disease problems that were hereditary, they could not operate. I began to look at everything else. I began to look at things like magnet therapy, just Reiki healing. Reiki is energy healing, sound healing. I had been doing music and sound. I had been going to sound baths mostly for stress, relaxation, mindfulness, all the good stuff. But then I began to realize that sound healing is so much more powerful than even that. I got certified as a sound healer and began just expanding my repertoire of sound healing and energy healing work. And now, I mean, this I think you'll find fascinating. Doctors are incorporating sound healing and Reiki energy medicine into their hospitals across the United States and Europe, into hospitals, departments of integrative therapies. And last year, when my mom was in the hospital for cancer, that major hospital in Charlotte, North Carolina, had a department of integrative therapy that worked with the hospital and with hospice to help people. The science behind it is being proven by major universities all over the country. There's some fascinating work coming out of UCLA here in California by a researcher who works with medical doctors. The researcher's name is James Jimzewski, and he, in collaboration with doctors, have found that the different types of cells in the body, the heart cells, the brain cells, they have their own frequency of hertz, which is simply the measure of vibration of sound. They each have their own unique vibration. And when cells, if they look in a petri dish of heart cells that have become atrophied or brain cells, they realize that those atrophied cells can be brought back to their normal cellular function by applying those frequencies to the cells. So sound reinvigorates them. It holds great promise for the future of medicine, and lots of medical doctors are writing about this. There's a well-known oncologist by the name of Dr. Mitchell Gaynor, who wrote a wonderful book called The Power of Sound Healing. And he uses sound therapy himself. He conducts a sound bath for his cancer patients. He believes in it that much, right along in complement with Western medicine, of course. And so that was one of the things I really, really, I got certified in sound healing. Like I said, I became a Reiki master, and I began applying those things in my own life. When I began doing the sound treatments, in other words, when I was better enough to be out of my completely bedridden state, about 3-4 years in, I got a gong, and the gong has the widest range, the lowest lows, the highest highs that we can't hear. Many dogs and other animals can hear these sounds, but human ears cannot detect them. But our cells at the cellular level pick up on that sound. And I began noticing I'd have really accelerated healing. Again, it's now been, going on. It's been, over 7 years, going on 8 years that all of this has been healing. But over time, I believe everything is incremental. It's like anything in life. Everything is incremental. You can't go to the gym and lift weights once and have a fit body. You got to keep at it. So applying all of these things over the years, I have noticed big changes. So again, to answer your question, it wasn't just one thing.
Right.
It was a lot of complementary therapies put together. And then what I call in the book, stick with itness, sticking with it, not just trying it for a short time, really, really incorporating it into my daily self-care regimen, right? That's what has made the difference for sure. Yeah.
So here's a question, a little bit of a quick question, but you talk about thriving a lot. If you were to, and you've talked about unstoppable thriving, how would you distill, or what would you say are 3 major points that lead to being able to be an unstoppable thriver, if you will?
Oh, I love this question so much, Michael. Okay. So my book is a toolkit of like 36 tools that get us to answer this question, but I'm going to give you my top 3. And I think the very first one is really deep self-care and self-compassion. When things like this happen, we tend to think, okay, I'll take better care of myself. I'll eat right, or I will exercise more, whatever it happens to be in your own situation. There is something called robust self-care and robust self-compassion that's really about giving your body everything it needs to heal. If you need to sleep 12 hours a night, that's what you've got to do. And we all say, oh, I don't have time for that. I got a busy life. I've got all these other responsibilities and commitments. I don't have time for that. But that's what your body often needs, is that level of really deep self-care. And when things happen to us, again, physically, emotionally, mentally, spiritual, dark night of the soul, whatever it happens to be, we tend to think of our bodies and ourselves as betraying us, as being the enemy. I hear my clients say this all the time. And there was a point early on when I was like that. It's like, my body has betrayed me. How could this happen? I'm young. I'm active. I'm doing all the right stuff from every standpoint. Doctors would say, you're doing everything exactly right. And yet I had all this stuff going on. We think our bodies betrayed us, but our bodies, and this is a wonderful book by Dr. Gabor Mate, who writes, When the Body Says No. Our bodies are sending us loving signals of pain. They're telling us when we need to stop doing stuff or cut back or rest. Allergies, Anxiety, pick anything. Arrhythmia, pick anything. Your body is sending you a signal. We have to say, and this has been hard for me because recently I've had a resurgence of some knee problems, and they were pretty debilitating. And we thought I was going to need knee surgery, that I've been avoiding since I was like 14 years old. We thought I was really close to it. And it was really hard to say to my knee, oh my goodness, my beautiful, hardworking knee, you have helped me so much in my life. I'm listening to you and doing deep inquiry. What are you trying to tell me? What am I doing wrong here? Right? I needed more rest. I simply needed more rest. I'm thrilled to say that problem over a few months, and with physical therapy and with doing all the right things, I'm back to walking again. I'm walking as much as I did before. So it's about, at one point last year when my mom had multiple myeloma and was in hospital and then hospice and incredibly stressful time, I started having arrhythmia. I've never had arrhythmia before. I had to, practice what I've been saying in my book and take a deeper dive and say, my wonderful, hardworking heart, what is up? Why is this happening to me? Right? So that is self-care and self-compassion. So that's one big piece. And to be able to get into that dialogue with ourselves in our very busy, highly interrupted, device-driven world, it's hard to slow down and listen. But that brings me to my second point. And that is really listening to what I call our inner healer.
Mm-hmm.
Our inner healer is our intuition. It is our gut instinct, if you will. Our bodies, and we knew this when we were children, right? We had instincts. We listened to our instincts. If you walk into a room and there's a person and you don't like that person, you don't hang around that person. You try to get away. It could be, a certain food that you didn't like as a kid. You just didn't want to eat it, right? As we become adults, whether it's societal conditioning or we have very busy lives and we just fall into patterns or whatever, we stop listening so much. And when we get still, hard to find the time, I know, but even 10 minutes of quiet time where we go out in nature, we go for a walk, we just sit quietly in meditation. I've been meditating since my early 20s. I love meditation. I recognize it's not for everyone. My clients tell me it's not, for them necessarily. And we find other ways. But finding something that connects you with yourself, where you can listen to your dreams, where you can listen to your intuition, follow your gut instincts about what feels right for you. If something doesn't feel right, don't push yourself to do it. Right. And that is something that I think it can be very, very hard for us in our modern age to slow down enough and do. And I alluded to this, the third one earlier, finding our medicine. Nature is medicine. Creativity is medicine. As I found, sound healing, Reiki energy, they're medicine. What is your medicine? To all of our listeners out there, what is your medicine? Do you know what your medicine is? What brings you joy? What makes time fly where you just don't even realize how much time has transpired? Those things really, really help us to find that joyful, happy place where we're in the flow. And as I mentioned by the book I referenced, Cured, that is healing. But also what we've been talking about so much, which is your mind is your medicine. How can you harness the power of your mind to heal, whether it's visualizing, telling yourself affirmations, just stopping yourself when you get to the point where you're going down the dark rabbit hole, just saying, oh, there I go again. Yeah. Going to that place. Let me just stop that and choose something different. Like we said, everything's a choice. Choose something different is making your mind your medicine. Those are my top big three. I mean, the whole the science behind this is, everything in the universe, as Albert Einstein and Tesla, Nikola Tesla told us, and lots of other scientists, everything is energy. Everything vibrates. If everything is energy, our thoughts, our words, our actions, our feelings are energy. So choose the good stuff, right? Catch yourself when you're and we all have days. I have them regularly where I find myself getting in a bit of a snarky mood or something, and things just aren't going quite right, or I'm not feeling quite right, and I go to that bad place, but I quickly say, Kathy, there you go, you're going to that place. What can we choose that would be more positive? That is a choice of energy. And energy is healing. Yeah.
Well, we only have a few minutes, but I have a couple of quick questions for you. Hopefully they're quick. You've talked about sound healing and a sound bath, but not everybody can make it to a place to get a sound bath. How can they deal with sound healing at home?
I love that question, and I can make it brief. Okay. So we don't necessarily have to go to a sound bath or a yoga studio to get sound healing. Many things in our lives, our voice. We don't need special equipment. We've got a voice, right? Humming, singing have been found. Dr. Jonathan Goldman has been writing about this for decades. The power of the humble hum. It connects our ear to our vagus nerve, the wandering nerve through our bodies that touches all the organs, that controls heartbeat, blood pressure, all the things we never think about. Humming and singing are hugely stimulating. That's one thing. Percussive tapping on our body. I happen to be a drummer, so I tend to drum. Drum is rhythmic. It's the sound of our mother's heartbeat when we were in the womb, and it helps us to settle into a place of coherence. And so those are just two small things that have very, very big benefit. We can just tap on our chest bone, or there's a thing called emotional freedom tapping, EFT, where you tap on different parts of the body. I have written, to make this really brief, Michael, I've written an article about sound healing. I also have another article about your mind is your medicine, and another one about the power of intuition. 3 articles in Yoga Magazine that people can find for free on my website. And we'll get to that URL later. Yeah.
So an observation and then 2 quick questions. It's, there's an advantage of having lived on the earth a while and having a memory. I remember when the United States started interacting with China during the Nixon administration, and somewhere along the line, we started to hear about this thing called acupuncture that we had never really heard of before. And a lot of people poo-pooed it and so on. And now it is a much more common mechanism that is used. It was even used on Roselle, my guide dog, who was with me in the World Trade Center when she developed some back problems, and it helped. But the reality is, just because it isn't something that goes along with the traditional Western medicine approach, and even my doctor at Kaiser will say this, it doesn't mean that it doesn't work and that it is invaluable, because it is. And we really need to look at all options. Having said that, let me ask you this. You said that you have a free gift for anybody listening. Can you tell us about that?
I do.
Oh, good.
Acupuncture, I would just add, it's much like sound healing, it's been around for thousands of years.
Oh, it's been around a long time. It's just that we haven't had exposure to it.
That's right. And acupuncture was one of the things on when I said I use very many modalities, I've done a lot of acupuncture over decades. So yes, I'm a big believer in acupuncture. Part of why it works is because the same as the chakra system in Indian Ayurvedic medicine, right? These are the energy centers of the body, and they can get blocked. So here's the free gift, Michael. I'm thrilled to be able to offer this to our listeners today. At my website, and we'll link the URL at the very top. You can access this for free. drcharlize.com. Davis, a doctor of functional medicine and fellow Reiki Master, and I have put together a few modules called Healing the Heart Chakra. And she comes from the medical perspective of saying, when your heart chakra is blocked, what does that turn up with as in your health? Sure, the heart, of course, the lungs, yeah, but shoulder issues, all kinds of things. And she goes into this in great detail. And then I come at it from the perspective of what we were just talking about, the chakra, what a blocked heart chakra feels like, what is happening in your life that would tell you that your heart chakra is blocked. It's more than just, I don't feel love. I mean, that's a common thing, but it's way more than that. And then the best part of the free gift, you'll learn about all of these things. And then the best part, I think, is that I do a sound bath geared toward balancing and opening the heart chakra. And I also give Reiki energy during that. And Dr. Charlize, as a Reiki master, also gives Reiki energy throughout the sound bath as well. So it's really powerful. And
so there's a link to all of that there's a link to that all on the website.
It's at the very top of the website. Yep.
So tell us what your website is and how people can reach out to you, because I'm assuming that you do interact with people all over.
I do. I do sound baths. I do individualized sound baths, which target to your very specific issues. So
how do people reach out to you?
My website is sufferingtothriving.com. And there they can reach out to me. They can learn more about my work. They can look at my book, Suffering to Thriving. They also can connect with all of my social media, and they can access how to work with me and email me from that place as well. So it's all right there at the website. On the homepage at the bottom, there are more podcasts and articles, lots of free article content too, if anyone's interested in exploring this at a deeper level.
So sufferingtothriving.com. Well,
that's right.
Kathy, I want to thank you for being here and giving us so much information. There's a lot of very invaluable stuff here, and I hope people will listen and have an open mind, because the reality is the more we explore, the more we learn, and the more we learn, the more we can put into practice, and the more we do, especially for ourselves, the better we'll be. So I want to thank you for being here, and I want to thank all of you for listening today. This has been fun, and I hope that you have found it fun. I'd love to hear from you. I'd love to hear what you think about our episodes, and this one today in specific. Feel free to email me at michaelhi@accessibe.com, or you can email me at speaker@michaelhingson, michaelhingson.com. I would also invite you to, wherever you're listening, please give us a 5-star rating. We value your reviews, your input, and especially your 5-star ratings whenever you feel inclined to do so. So please give us a 5-star rating. If you know of anyone who ought to be a guest on Unstoppable Mindset, let us know. Email me at speaker@michaelhingson.com. Introduce us and we'll go from there. And of course, Kathy, same for you. If you know anyone, we'd love to hear from you. But one more time, I'd like to thank you for being here and for taking the time to be with us today.
Thank you, Michael. It has been just a delight. And thank you for the beautiful work that you do.